best to stay out of the sun here today.
Here, I can adjust too.
Well, pleasure to see all of you here today. I want to start by saying I'm going to say a few words about what we're doing and some of the things that I'm hoping to accomplish here in the near term as city manager. But I really want to emphasize that I'm here to listen and gather input, hear from all of you, learn a little bit from all of you. I hope you have questions and can offer some information for me. I would say that I'm on a bit of a listening circuit around the community. I've done a few of these at different places, different associations, different groups. I think it's important. I've been with the city for 16 years. I know the city very well. I know a lot of you, but I do want to continue to learn and understand your perspective. Things change. Just to give you a little bit of background, I started in the city as the community services director, did that for about 4.5 years, was moved over to the public works department and served as the public works director for about the same period of time. Was then picked up as the assistant city manager under Joe Hefkin for the past roughly 7 years or so. Time really flew in that role. And then thankfully the council was willing to appoint me to city manager in November. So I've only been on the job a couple of months. It's been an exciting few months. There's a lot to do. We have a very active city council. We have one member here. She, among her colleagues, they're all very committed to the community, and they're very involved in driving policy. So it's busy, but it's exciting. And I will say one of the things that I've noticed in transitioning to this role is that it's been reinvigorating for me professionally. It's really been interesting and fun to kind of think about new challenges and maybe where we can take the city in new ways. And a couple of the areas that I'm focusing on, in particular in the city manager's office, and this is outside of sort of council-directed activities. We just adopted our most recent strategic plan, which will set a lot of those objectives. But internally, trying to bring about a refresh sort of look at how we gather information. Tani just mentioned, sharing information in Redondo Beach. I feel like the city for many years has been quite stale as a touchstone, as a point of information. Our social media accounts are not really widely used by departments. Police departments fairly active, community services on occasion, but we don't really have a clearinghouse for how we gather information and disseminate information to the public. And we really need to focus on that. My old position, the assistant city manager position, was split into two assistant to the city manager positions for two very distinct reasons. One, to create somebody focused on culling information in the community, looking at how we present ourselves as a city to the community, really mainly through our website and then our social media platforms and some of the other things that we can do to engage feedback, and try to make sure that information is truly useful and presentable to you in a way that you desire. If you look at our website right now, it's very stale. The information is outdated. It's not very intuitive. If you know city services, you can find everything you need. If you don't know city services, you're really lost. And we're really trying to flip that on its head and look at that. And that's, in a sense, a bit of a public information officer function, but really more than that, in that we're trying to gather and cull that information and create new platforms for the community to engage the city. We might be looking into polling programs. We might be looking into two-way engagement, active online engagement, to try to help gather feedback in real time. So that's one focus. The other area is, if you look at our city, I think we're still quite stale in how we deliver services electronically and online. We had to get a little bit better at that over the last 2 years during the pandemic because there was just no choice. You couldn't meet in person. You couldn't gather at the counter. If you're trying to pull a building permit, you couldn't show up and do it the way we used to do it with card stock and keeping accounting of everybody's applications in a file folder. That we had to go away from that. So the other assistant too that we've hired is ultimately going to focus on, I think, bridging technological deficiency on a customer service basis. So where we have an ability to maybe get more online, we're going to try to get more online effectively. And then, of course, they'll be focused on the other wonderful things the council has directed us to do. We have by the time we adopted the strategic plan Tuesday night, we had 55 objectives over the next 6 months. That might be a few too many. I've tried to warn the council of that, but there is so much enthusiasm and eagerness to try to get things done. It's difficult to hold everybody back. So and it ranges. I think for all of you who are interested in North Redondo Beach, some of the exciting things that are happening are really a focus on the implementation of our corridor plan. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Laura, I imagine, is mentioning that to you periodically over the course of these meetings. And really what that was is kind of a targeted plan for the corridor, both Artesia and Aviation, that in a sense will hopefully bring about increased economic development and in effect vitalize sort of business community that we have up here. And really the core thing I think that has to be focused on for us to execute any change is the completion of this very laborious environmental review on evaluating our parking standards for all of your businesses. One of the things that's unique about Artesia Boulevard is our code was created at a time where retail was really king. Everything was about driving and making sure that you had an ability to get to your store, buy your good, park, and leave. So our code requires a very, I would call it an excessive number of parking spaces for just about every other business type we have, because it was really retail centric. Modern codes today, with a community like ours, with the densities we have both north and south of Artesia, and I think a desirous community to walk and experience the boulevard from a pedestrian standpoint, really has to change from a parking standard to allow for that, right? We can't force every business that's here to provide 50 parking spaces if they're a walk-up restaurant or if they're a temporary coffee spot. We have to have more flexibility in how we allow those businesses to actually improve, come in, and open their doors. So that's the first thing we're doing. We're in the process of reviewing the parking. You can't just go out and make the changes. Under the law, you have to study the impacts of those changes, and then you have to consider them carefully, and then you have to make really the policy call. And hopefully the council here later this spring, summer, will have an opportunity to evaluate that data and maybe make some changes that will help all of you and some of your future business colleagues along the corridor be more successful. So that's one area. There's more happening on that study. We're also looking at changing floor area ratio caps for businesses and construction in along the boulevard. Right now, we have a very limited floor area ratio. We're studying the kind of mix of uses that we currently allow for in the code, where we place office vis-a-vis the front of the street or second story. So we're creating some more flexibility there. Hopefully, again, all of those changes have to be studied before they can be implemented. So we ask that you be a little bit patient. It's frustratingly slow. Our environmental review requirements can be, like I said, fairly laborious. So we're working on it, and we hope to give you some relief here soon. I think the other thing that's exciting about North Redondo Beach right now, particularly Artesia Boulevard, is we're on the precipice, I believe, finally, of a significant revitalization of the South Bay Galleria. That has been a long time coming. The entitlement was now, I think we're 3 years old on the original entitlement. The Galleria's had to make some changes sort of post-pandemic to their plan. I'm sure all of you have seen that plan. It's a little different than was originally approved, but it still includes significant adjustments to the Nordstrom's box, whereby now they will be actually filling in that gap that exists between the sidewalk and the box to allow for an on boulevard entry to that primary store, which really will turn the mall, I think, north towards Artesia to make it a better experience, I think, for the entire corridor. It still includes the 300 residential units that were envisioned in the original plan. Those have, though, moved now to the corner of Hawthorne and Artesia Boulevard. It still includes the hotel that they had envisioned here, just down the way here off of Kingsdale. The drawings for that are quite beautiful. They look very exciting. I think that's going to be a really cool, hip spot along the boulevard. So the Galleria is moving forward. It's moving forward a little differently than was originally envisioned, but it's still in progress, and I think they're nearing execution. There's a single entity owner now, El Catterton. They seem committed to Redondo Beach. They see value in this community, which is great. And I think we're certainly looking forward to helping them along and getting that built. The other thing that's happening not too far away from here is the finalization of our transit center construction. We've been working on that, back in the days when Don was a city council member. That thing's about 15 years old in planning. But we're very close to actually building that and moving our transit operations from the corner off of Kingsdale down the way to the new facility near Target. I think it's going to be a great improvement to the corridor. The project also includes right-of-way adjustments to Kingsdale itself. It includes some additional beautification along what would be the east side of the boulevard from a landscaping standpoint. Should make the corridor, I think, just look a lot more attractive, feel more bucolic, and I think be more of a destination for everybody, whether you're using the transit center or just simply shopping kind of in the area. So we're excited about those improvements. Kingsdale, of course, is a really beat up road. We desperately need to get that resurfaced, and that's part of the effort too. So lots of good things, I think, happening in this part of town. Redondo Beach is really just a unique place in that we have all these different commercial sectors that need attention. And it's sometimes hard to juggle all of them, but each of them are so unique and they really have so much potential. And that's what sort of makes, I think, this job and public administration in Redondo Beach so exciting. So really, that's kind of it for my canned remarks. If you've got questions, I'd love to hear them. Yes.
Can you explain floor area ratio and how that's changing?
Yeah, so I think maybe the easy explanation, let's say you had a 10,000 square foot property, right? If you have a 0.5 floor area ratio, that means you can build a 5,000 square foot building on your 10,000 square foot property in really simple terms. Now, there might be other things that make that difficult to execute. If you have parking requirements or you have egress ingress issues or driveways and things that may, in a sense, squeeze that a bit. But that's really what floor area ratio means. Typically, when you extend floor area ratio or expand it, you can add more commercial property to the lot, right? So when you get to 1.0, it means you have as much square footage inside your building as you do your entire lot. If you go to 1.5, it's 150% of the total lot size, which means you typically have to go up in order to build that. So that's where sometimes that can create consternation with neighbors. If you get, if the floor area ratio gets too big, you get a lot of density and it feels like it sort of squeezes the community. So you have to find that right balance for everybody to feel comfortable. But generally speaking, higher floor area ratio allows for greater investment in the property itself. Yes, Tom.
Unfortunately, our city has sat on its hands as far as addressing the laws for cannabis are concerned. And that has allowed an outside entity to come in here and get a proposition
This is a question about cannabis
ballot that takes control out of the hands of our city for whatever the future would be for retail cannabis. Could you address what, if anything, the city is going to do to counteract that? Will there be a second measure on the ballot that gives an alternative that is city favored versus outside commercial interests?
Yeah, and maybe I would back up a little bit. The prior city manager, Joe Hefkin, many of you know him, actually started a city manager task force, a working group, a couple of years ago to begin studying the reality of cannabis. Right? It's here. It's among us. Voters approved retail cannabis statewide several years ago now, but cities have been a little bit hesitant to allow in their code for retail licenses. We were reviewing that. We were studying it. We had a broad working group made up of members of law enforcement, Beach City's health district, some residential groups, some folks who know the business, the cannabis industry well, to try to get a sort of collective understanding of what sort of local regulations would best fit Redondo Beach. The process took a long time. I don't want to make excuses for it. At the end of the day, COVID and other things happened, and we were a little slow getting a draft ordinance out. We've sort of kicked that into high gear now. So to answer your question specifically, a cannabis-based retail group, actually a partnership group, has come forward with an initiative, not just here in Redondo Beach, but some of our neighboring cities as well. This is a very common approach to try to force local communities to actually create a license program so retail can actually be cited in the community. And they have qualified that measure through signatures, and it will be on the ballot in March of 2023. The council has made that decision. our ordinance is still tracking. We are drafting the ordinance. The council's given basic direction on the types of parameters that we want to include in our code, the number of licenses that we want to ultimately issue here in town, the sort of buffer zones we would create around the eventual placement of the businesses, whether it's distances from schools or distances from other types of community centers or parks. So they've provided that general direction, and we are now undergoing a drafting of what would be a Redondo Beach ordinance that would not have to go to the ballot. It would simply be a council action, administrative action, whereby they could adopt an ordinance, you know this process well, introduce and adopt an ordinance that would then be effective. If there's a scenario where we could have our own ordinance in place for a period of 6 months roughly or so, and the cannabis initiative will be on the ballot, and voters could approve that and effectively trump whatever local ordinance we've established. We certainly hope that wouldn't happen. If we take the time to prepare and craft what we think from a city council community standpoint is the right ordinance for the right set of regulations for cannabis in the community, we hope that the residents would appreciate that and stick with ultimately what we've established. But at some point that is going to be a decision made by the voters. So we're going to proceed to create our own process. And, hopefully that's the right balance for the community going forward. But, cannabis is here to stay. It's a reality. We should, I believe personally, we should find a way to properly regulate it and provide for some level of retail here in the community. That may be 2 locations. There's some discussion about whether it's 2 or 3. But ultimately, I think, it won't be too much longer before there'll be an opportunity for businesses to come into Redondo Beach and sell cannabis products.
And the state says it's legal in the state, but the feds want to either take it or tax it. And you are making money off of business. And the feds said, well, you got to pay taxes, but you're doing something illegal. Won't they come in and close the shops? And obviously they're not. But how are they getting the money to the bank or to wherever it's going in their 401k?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question, one that we've thought about quite a bit. Electronic banking is regulated by federal government, right? So, how do you electronically bank an activity that's technically against the law, against federal law? This is still a little bit of a gray area, to be honest. A lot of states and now cities have experienced this for quite some time, for years. Colorado's, of course, been dealing this for a long time. Depending on the administration of the time, this is either a bigger issue or not a bigger issue. Under our current administration federally, it's really not a big concern of ours. That could change if the administration were to change and have a different focus. But it's kind of a reality. I think we're just going to have to sort of trudge along and figure out how to deal with that. There's some question about what our ultimate revenue source is effectively a license fee for the property. That in itself is a little different than sort of a gross percentage of profits or taking money directly from the retailer. So there's a little bit of, in a sense, kind of a creative way to kind of separate those issues. But honestly, I mean, we all know the source of the fund. And I think it's just a matter of whether or not the feds are really ultimately going to try to regulate such a thing. They haven't. And, ideally, they'd sort of step away from the issue and kind of go along with the states that have approved it and not have this conflict that exists. But it is a concern. And depending on the specific White House, it's either a greater concern or less of a concern. Yeah.
At the city is longer than elected officials. You're going to be here for a while, we hope. When you look ahead 5, 10, 15 years, what is it that you really want to see different in our city? Whether it's the revenue or different green space or different culture within the city government. you talked a little bit earlier about some of the changes you saw from your other perch. But now that you're in charge and you're going to be building with the next couple of councils in the future, what is your 10, 15-year vision as your career's playing out that you want to do with this place that you work in every day?
Sure,
Can you
great.
repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is sort of what is my personal 10 to 15-year vision for Redondo Beach, assuming I'm fortunate enough to be able to serve in the capacity for that long. I hope so. Redondo, to me, I go back to the notion that there's so much opportunity in Redondo Beach. We have such a great community, such a great mix of residential uses, an incredible school district, which has really buoyed our community for quite some time. And we have benefited from that directly from a tax revenue standpoint. I mean, our property tax revenue has been just outstanding the last 10 years, despite maybe a sluggish sales tax revenue base at times and utility user tax kind of stagnation that's occurred. But our property tax has been fantastic. So we are, at the end of the day, we're a residential focused community that has a lot of these really cool, exciting sort of commercial sectors that work, I think, in harmony with that. So for me, one of the things that's always driven me is placemaking, and that's constructing and improving our public infrastructure. That we can control a little more directly than having to work through partnerships with the commercial sector or other areas. So for me personally, I'd like to see us continue for the next decade to really focus on our capital plan, execute our capital plan at a high level, and really bring about higher quality roads, parks, public spaces, whether that's in existing facilities or if it's an opportunity for us to grow into new areas, potentially at the AES power plant site, potentially along the SCE right-of-way corridor here and in South Redondo. There's additional opportunity, I would say, in Riviera Village for some extended improvements, certainly along this boulevard here. I look at the waterfront. I mean, I know could be a kind of a trigger word for a lot of people, but there's incredible potential at the waterfront, particularly with the execution of our public amenities. If in the next 10 years we could revitalize Seaside Lagoon, build a public boat launch ramp, and maybe add another amenity or two and improve it, that would be fantastic, because it takes a long time to build anything of substance, particularly in that area of town. So it's a commitment to capital infrastructure, capital construction. You can turn your attention to some of our civic facilities. Our police station is very tired. For a long time we were chasing the notion that we could go out and bond for a brand new police facility. I just don't think that our community really has the stomach for that and the costs that go with that. I think our focus really with our civic campus has to be reinvesting in what we have today, whether that's refurbishing City Hall in its current location, refurbishing the police station, and now it's kind of two locations. Our corporation yard, our public works yard, our parks yard also need reinvestment. Our fire stations need reinvestment. So I see us ideally identifying funding and trying to renovate those spaces in their current locations so we can sort of plan for the future rather than chase this notion of, we're going to have 6 brand new civic facilities here in the next 10 to 15 years. It just isn't going to happen. I've heard that talk for 16 years, and it's great to think long-term that way, but then you have to really look at Redondo Beach's history and I think recognize that we're better off reinvesting in the spaces we're in today, because that tends to be far more tolerable to our residents than I think, massive change in those areas. So I'd say reinvestment in current place and with the idea that ultimately we're improving those places and improving those experiences for our residents.
Mike, we have a question on Facebook.
Okay.
Along the lines of infrastructure, could you talk about Inglewood and Manhattan Beach and what's going on there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The question was what's happening from an infrastructure standpoint on Inglewood Avenue and Manhattan Beach Boulevard. Inglewood we're just about ready to start construction at Inglewood. For those who don't know, we've been funded for several years for the installation of a new right turn lane, southbound side of Inglewood in front of the new gas station. All of you travel that area. We all do. It's a point of consternation. It's a very busy intersection. The alignment's poor. It's confusing. It gets backed up. You've got the train tracks. Inglewood's a mess. So what we've been able to do is work with the property owner to acquire the requisite right-of-way area that we need to actually add an extended and new dedicated right turn lane to go effectively westbound on Manhattan Beach Boulevard. So that's really going to be a nice improvement. I think both physically as well as just from a streaming of traffic there. Manhattan Beach Boulevard is another project. We're in the process of creating construction plans and specifications for a refurbishment to the entire stretch of Manhattan Beach Boulevard, well, 90% of it anyway. And that should be back to the council for approval here in the next couple of months, and probably out to bid and starting construction, I would guess, sometime this summer if I had to pick a time after we get through bidding and everything else. But that's a multi-million-dollar effort. They're both multi-million-dollar projects that are ultimately significant investments in this kind of the northern edge of our community, and I think they'll be quite beneficial. Who wants to go first?
I agree that the Manhattan Beach Boulevard is a nice way to deal with the street, and Manhattan Beach Boulevard leads right into Manhattan Beach, and an issue that was brought up 4 or 5 years ago in NRBBA was Artesia Boulevard being turned back into its original name of Redondo Beach Boulevard, which indicates the city that it's located in. And that was a big fuss about that, and a lot of us were involved with that, and of course it ended up dying. But what's your thoughts? Was there anything going on with that ever?
You're referring to the renaming of Artesia Boulevard?
No, we're going back to the old one, restoring the
Yeah.
and it could end right here, right at Kingsdale.
Right.
It could become Artesia, and
Right. It's an age-old question up here. Don initiated it back in his day. Listen. At the end of the day, I would be happy for us to rename it to Redondo Beach Boulevard, but there's the pragmatic side of me that says for us to be really effective in that, we need our partnering cities, which are really, in this case, Manhattan Beach and Lawndale, to also go along with it, right? What we don't want to have is a hybrid road that's got Redondo Beach Boulevard on one side and something else on Artesia on the other, or vice versa. We really need it to be kind of a unified effort. When we last polled those communities, when we were thinking about doing this, there was resistance from a few of them. I think Lawndale was maybe willing. I can't remember. I think Manhattan Beach and Hermosa were a little more squishy on the idea. So we just dropped it. At the end of the day, we can only focus on things that I think we have likely, prospect of executing. So that's where we are. I mean, it's a great idea, and maybe at some point that idea will have will come at the right time with the right sort of support.
So, I don't know you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I run a business right here in Inglewood and Artesia. I live at Kingsdale on 182nd.
Oh, great.
So this area is very important to me. I was vocal with the Galleria project, spoke for the planning commission. But one of the things I haven't addressed, and that is now becoming a concern for me, we have to test drive vehicles on this boulevard. We have to. We come out Artesia, we can only make a right. Going back to the 80s, when I was here in 85, 86, 87, the mall was fairly new. Traffic backed up to Artesia Boulevard. They used to have a right turn signal at Kingsdale, which helped the flow from the right lane, so at least we could get around the block, which was taken out some years later. Now adding more residents, adding the mall, and the traffic that's come to it. Has anything been thought of what they're going to do for the backup that's going to affect people even wanting to come to our businesses on this side of the boulevard, on this side of the mall, because they got to fight the mall traffic to come in, and for those businesses that have to go in and out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can't say I specifically recall what would be proposed at the intersection of, say, Kingsdale, eastbound Artesia. I can tell you definitively that our Kingsdale project actually includes the addition, I believe, of another turn lane coming northbound on Kingsdale onto Artesia Boulevard. I can't remember if it's another right turn lane or another left turn lane, but we are adding another turn lane in there. Is it right turn? Yeah. So I think we're conscious of that. What happens on Artesia, I'd have to go back and look specifically at what the traffic mitigation measures were. I know we're studying our left turn pockets along Artesia, which doesn't address the concern you're mentioning, because there has been some consternation with sort of those turning movements in particular, and that's coming back to council here in a few months. But I'd have to look into that to know for sure.
It is worth looking at, because you have a bus stop right after you go past the corner. The buses stop, traffic backs up. And again, it hasn't been a problem for 15
Right.
years. This thing's 15 years overdue.
Yeah, yes.
So it's not an issue. But I see it being an issue as things move forward with the construction projects, with
Right.
eventually opening and what's going to happen. The backup, again, I go back to where I was on this boulevard every day looking out my office window at stop traffic right in front of me
Right.
in the 80s. I can only imagine what it's going to be like when they get this opened up with more residents. Obviously,
Sure.
we're more condensed than we were back then. And I just think that's going to be an issue. It should be addressed earlier than later.
No, it's a good thought. I will say that thankfully the transit center will be moving by then. It'll have moved. So if the transit kind of operation is a part of that backup, then at least that will have been shifted down further south along Kingsdale. So maybe that helps a bit. But yeah, I'll look into that question. It's not one I know the answer offhand. So thank you, Tanya.
So I think it's no secret that civil discourse in this city is out of control. And I've been witness to our city council members really trying to lean on some of our law enforcement officers to treat people that they like or dislike a certain type of way. Okay? I just would like to know, from your perspective, your job, how do you plan to keep those lines clear and not blurred? Because it seems like they're not sure all the time what their role is in regards to our police department. And since we're going to have a new chief, I know that community policing has been huge in the city. It's worked really well. It's been a model for other cities. And kind of what you're looking for in the next police chief.
Yeah, the next police chief, for those who don't know, Chief Kaufman is going to be retiring from the police department here at the end of this month. What's great is a couple of things. Keith has done an excellent job, not only creating a strong community engagement effort and programs that really, I believe, encourage dialogue in a contemporary way as it comes to community policing, but we've done a great job with succession planning inside the department. We have great command staff, and I feel very comfortable promoting from within our organization currently, because I have a lot of faith and confidence in the captains and the lieutenants that currently work for us. So I'm going forward with an internal recruitment, and we'll have an announcement, I think, by the end of the month after we go through that process. But we'll certainly be looking for someone who continues to have a focus on community-minded programming and that positive interaction that we've created over the last several years with our community members, being good listeners, and really responding to any concerns or questions that come through in that regard. As it relates to civil discord, I'm not a big social media guy. For those who know me, I don't like the vitriol I see, nationally with that platform. I think a lot of people right now find it important to draw incredible lines in the sand and really, pick a position or side. I'd much prefer people to be open in their conversations and their thinking and be objective and try to be as reasonable and respectful as they can be. I recognize in a political environment that's not always possible. Personally, from staff's perspective, we do our best to keep our head down and do the work. That's where I like to focus. We try to stay out of the politics and really focus on policy and the direction we've received from the council on various objectives and initiatives. We don't want to be contributors to that conversation. We want to help solve problems and execute projects and hopefully get people excited about what we're accomplishing and not fighting over what could be or couldn't be. My approach to that is to just focus on doing the work and making sure that we treat people with respect and throughout our organization, and at least for those folks that work for the city as an employee.
in a way that will hurt residents that they don't like, the line isn't clear to them. And I know that the city manager has an opportunity to make sure that this is clear. The city council does not have anything to do with law enforcement. They are separate entities, correct?
Correct. And to my experience, and I don't know the specific issues you're referencing, they know that very clearly. That they have one employee, that's me, and they're not to influence other departments or operations. Now, I certainly allow the council to have direct communication with our department heads and seek information and ask questions about referrals or project status and those types of things, or get opinions from subject matter experts throughout our city on different issues and questions. I encourage that. I certainly want that two-way dialogue. But at the end of the day, those employees, and this goes across the gamut, understand who they work for. They have a department head. The department head ultimately reports to me. The city council has one employee. To my knowledge and experience, the council understands that very clearly. There's a lot of talk, a lot of questions get asked, but from my perspective, I've not experienced that as an issue.
Can I follow up on that? Because you say that you're on a listening tour, you want to hear from people. We have a mayor who, for all his years in public office, has said that he wants to hear from the public and he wants to have that input before he makes decisions. And yet we have seen within the last 60 days his concerted effort to silence voices that have been long-standing contributors to our community who are just trying to help us move forward, and he doesn't like what they have to say and he's removing them from commissions. That's really not a trend that goes with your open-mindedness, nor with his prior BS that he wants to hear from everyone. How do we stop that kind of activity in our community?
Well, let me parse that out a little bit. We all have different roles in our organization, right? And it goes back to this notion of there's political responsibilities and then there's administrative responsibilities. At the end of the day, I'm the city council's chief policy advisor as it relates to matters of administrative function, right? I try to stay out of the political side of things, other than to be aware of what they're doing and how they affect maybe service. That's a better question for Bill, Don, honestly. That's not really mine to answer. At the end of the day, the council has its own role. They get to set policy as it relates to how they pick commissioners or committee members and how they ultimately decide to keep them on the committee or commission and ultimately decide to have them removed. That is purely a role for the city council under our charter and our responsibility. There are, I think, a lot of different opinions about what should occur in that regard or shouldn't occur. But at the end of the day, that one really falls very squarely in the elected official camp from my perspective. There have been transfers and things over time that have occurred. Yeah, this isn't the first time. They all take on a different sort of focus and nature and have different rationale and background. But yeah, this isn't. There have been changes in that regard historically. So, yeah.
Jim, our last question. I want to be respectful of Mike's time too.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking my question. You mentioned the ACAP plan for the Artesia Aviation corridor. And my question is that a high priority for the city? And if so, what are the implementation dates planned?
Yeah, it is a high priority for the city. I'll start there. The first exercise is this environmental review and study associated with potentially changing our parking standards in the code, as well as changing our use priorities in the code. And when I mean use, I mean office, retail, restaurant, etc. And then also looking at a slight change in our floor area ratio limitations in the code. Those studies are underway. We'd like them to go a little bit faster. I'm working on ways to try to accelerate the outcome and completion of those studies. But right now they're targeted for completion at the tail end of really the beginning of summer. And then that would lend itself to council decisions based on that, the results of those studies that would allow for eventual change to the code. So to answer your question from a milestone standpoint, I'm hopeful that we can make some of those changes to the code and relax the standards or modernize the standards is maybe the better word sometime this summer. But that's going to take a really concerted effort, and still got to figure out exactly how we're going to get that done.
Hey, Mike, thank you so much.
Happy to be here. Thank you.